tempo tonight with reports special counsel Robert Mueller has now impaneled a grand jury.
There are new signs tonight of just how serious the investigation into Russian interference in last fall's election is becoming. The Wall Street Journal reports special counsel Robert Mueller has impaneled a grand jury.
This grand jury is the single biggest threat ever faced by Donald Trump or anyone else named Trump or married to a Trump.
But is this as dramatic as some of the breathless coverage would suggest? Another media eruption over a Washington Post report that the president was behind Don Jr.'s first bare-bones statement on that meeting with the Russians, and many pundits questioning his credibility.
He's clearly focused on covering for his son, but the motive is in the covering, whether it's legal or not, to lie to reporters or to say misstatements to reporters. It certainly tells Bob Mueller this guy's into a cover-up.
Washington Post citing an anonymous source, shocking, anonymous, reporting the president was personally involved in the statement about his son, Don Jr.'s meeting with a Russian lawyer. I guess we live in a day and age where a father can't even help his son when false, phony allegations are being made.
If the president so casually says things that aren't true about minor phone calls, if he makes up stuff so easily, especially stuff involving the president of another country, why should anyone believe him on the big stuff, the things that really do matter?
If I have to have a president who lies about the Boy Scouts to destroy ISIS, I'll take the liar.
Are the media buying the White House line that the president was just acting like a father? We hear part of Anthony Scaramucci's profanity-laced call to a reporter that led in part to his ouster as communications chief. Does the audio cast this story in a rather different light? Plus, CNN's Jim Acosta lectures a top White House official over a new policy on legal immigration.
It's like you're trying to engineer the racial and ethnic flow of people into this country.
Yeah, that is one of the most outrageous, insulting, ignorant, and foolish things you've ever said.
Is that out of bounds for a White House correspondent? I'm Howard Kurtz, and this is Media Buzz. It was 4 weeks ago that the New York Times disclosed that Donald Trump Jr. held that meeting with the Russians who offered negative research on Hillary Clinton, which the president's son confirmed, but not before issuing an initial statement that said the meeting was primarily about adoption. Now, the Washington Post revived that controversy this week with a story saying that first statement had been dictated, that's the word the paper used, by the president.
The statement that Don Jr. issued is true. There's no inaccuracy in the statement. The president weighed in as any father would based on the limited information that he had.
And the media decibel level on the president's credibility soared even higher when the Wall Street Journal disclosed that special counsel Robert Mueller has convened a grand jury. Joining us now to analyze the coverage, Ellison Barber, a Washington correspondent for Fox News. Molly Hemingway, senior editor at The Federalist and a Fox News contributor. And Joe Trippi, Democratic strategist and also a Fox News contributor. Ellison, massive coverage of this Wall Street Journal story on the grand jury, which is a leak. Is it as dramatic a story as it seemed to play out in real time on CNN, on MSNBC, and on Fox?
I'm sure it is to someone, and I'm sure it's not to someone. That sort of seems to always be the issue with these Russia stories, right? Is someone is always going to say they think it's overplayed. I think when I look at it, I sort of look at it in a broad view of how I look at most stories. I see most stories as fitting in crudely into one of two categories: stories the public needs to know and stories they want to know. When it comes to most of the Russia-related stories, I think they fall into the category of need to know, because at this point, a lot of them are legal questions simply because a special counsel exists. But when it comes to the issue of whether or not it's too much, I think sometimes people forget how powerful their voice is. If you don't like it, click something else, change the channel, or send an email. I think the people tend to forget how often we actually do pay attention to those complaints in the media. And if it's overplayed, viewers, readers have a lot of power in dictating and letting us know that maybe we're going too far on.
Well, in this story, you could keep changing the channel until you got to the Cartoon Network. You were not going to escape. But Molly, you know, I have the take as a former Justice Department reporter that prosecutors routinely bring in grand juries to issue subpoenas, to hear evidence, to listen to witnesses. But the major media coverage suggests that that was not the view in the press.
Well, I think it actually is absolutely a big story, but you mentioned anything related to Russia, and one of the more interesting leaks that came out about this was that that Mueller is investigating things that have nothing to do with Russia, that have nothing to do with the 2016 elections. So I think part of the question is how you're covering it, and are you covering it with enough skepticism toward what we know about special prosecutors and how they run far afield of their original directions, and whether that's a good thing. I mean, there's been a lot of coverage of Mueller where they treat him like he is just beyond reproach, and it's like we have to forget how he botched that anthrax investigation, which was one of the worst, most mishandled cases that the FBI ever handled, or his close relationship with Comey. We should. I understand everybody dislikes Trump and that they think that they've decided he's guilty and they're just waiting to find out the details. But a good journalist should be more skeptical about the entire process.
Now, some shows and some journalists and outlets were fair in explaining that having a grand jury doesn't necessarily lead to an indictment. It's a tool for prosecutors, but has it have a big psychological impact on the coverage, Joe?
Well, yeah, of course it has. But the other thing was obvious. I mean, Mueller's going to impanel a grand jury. That was going to happen.
The bombshell would be if he didn't.
Right, exactly. I mean, can we imagine if he had, after a year of counterintelligence investigation, come back and him just recently being appointed came back and said, there's not going to be a grand jury, we're moving on to other things, and we're shutting down the office. Now, that would have been...
Well, in fact, though, if you don't find something out with what you are charged to be investigating, that's actually what you should be doing, is shutting down. And instead, what we're hearing, if we believe these anonymous sources, is that they're just going far afield of the original directions. You know, investigating things that have... There's no geographic limit, no time limit, no associate limit to what can be investigated.
That is true with the special prosecutor, but, you know, he hasn't been on the job that long, so I think it would take him a little long even to shut things down. But now, let's broaden this out a little bit. You've spent time in that White House briefing room. Are many reporters increasingly questioning whether the president, on various things, could be lying, might be lying, or is lying?
Probably. I mean, I think we've heard, and there have been a ton of different, I guess we want to call them hot takes, think pieces, whatever, on this issue of some people saying more journalists need to use the word lie and focusing a lot on how we cover things and getting down to the very specific words that we use. I think when it comes to specifically the lie and whether or not things are lies or if we should use that term, I just think for me as a reporter now, particularly with the political climate we're in, I find myself going back to dictionaries a lot more than I would have expected, triple checking myself to make sure, is this the word that I want to use? Because our words are very important, and I think sometimes it's important to say if a lie is a lie, say it's a lie and ask a question about it.
There have been real lies. I mean, when Flynn was fired because he lied to the vice president, then the president says, fires Comey and asks Comey, allegedly, to go soft on, let Flynn go. So
that part is in dispute. Now, the reason the lie thing comes up with the Don Jr. statement about that Russia meeting is that the president's lawyer, Jay Sekulow, initially said the president didn't have anything to do with that statement. Now the White House concedes that he weighed in to some degree.
Right. Well, so what we don't know is did the lawyer know the different story that the president had weighed in or dictated, or did Donald Trump not tell him? We don't know that. That's why they have the investigation.
In general, one of the things that's frustrating about media coverage of this is that there's so much over-promising and underachieving. So you're told that the president lied about something, and then you get the details, or that there was this false statement that was sent out by Don Jr. It turns out nobody's alleging that there was anything false about it. They're saying it was misleading. Well, that's kind of an interpretation, and I think journalists would have more success in their campaign against the president if they tempered the expectations by not being so dramatic about what they're saying is
campaign
appropriate.
Against the president. Is that how you view the state of affairs right now? That most of the media are campaigning to undermine and discredit this president?
I mean, I think there's no confusion about that. Both sides are at war with each other, and there's a niceness about how honest everyone's being about that.
Now, there was this extraordinary leak this week to the Washington Post. Some of this had leaked out before, but the Post getting a hold of a transcript of President Trump's calls with the leaders of Mexico and Australia. And even there, you had some anchors and pundits saying, well, Trump lied when he denied that his call with the Australian Prime Minister was testy. But that could be described, couldn't that be described as normal diplomacy where you have a tough conversation in private and you kind of paper it over in public?
I will let the pundits describe it. I think to your point, that's something where it's out there. The only thing that I look at and worry about as a journalist is who is blamed or who is criticized for that leak being out there.
What about the fact of the leak? I mean, you know, we were used to leaks at high levels of the administration, particularly this administration. But I mean, if a president can't talk to foreign leaders without having somebody who ostensibly works from leak it, that seems concerning.
Well, a number of national security experts have said that it is. I mean, you can look at Tommy Vietor, who was the National Security Council spokesperson under Barack Obama, said that he would have, I think he said, lost my mind if this had happened with transcripts of President Obama's calls. However, that being said, is that an issue? Is that a national security concern? Could be. As a journalist, that's not my problem or not my concern. If they want to worry about the leakers, that's one thing. But the Supreme Court has said, you go back to 1971 with the Pentagon Papers, that a leak is not necessarily problematic on a journalist side.
And David Axelrod, others in the Obama administration said that this was a bad thing to have happened, that the president should have that ability to talk to foreign leaders without having
whether you support the president.
The question is, are you going after the journalist or are you going after the leakers? And I think that's a difference.
On this question of journalists challenging actions by the president, there was also a statement the president had said in various places that he had gotten positive calls from the leader of Mexico and from the head of the Boy Scouts. Look at ABC's Cecilia Vega raising that question in a briefing.
Why did the president say that he received a phone call from the leader of the Boy Scouts and the president of Mexico when he did not? Did he lie?
No, I wouldn't say it was a lie. It was that's pretty bold accusation. It's the conversations took place.
So now we're into the level of, was it a phone call or was it a personal conversation? And these are getting the level of lie, although clearly sometimes there are missteps and misrepresentations.
Right. So again, the problem here is that Trump said he had a phone call when instead he had an in-person conversation. Or he said that the leader of the Boy Scouts called him when it was various leaders of the Boy Scouts. And I understand that Trump has some petty narcissism and the way he massages his ego in order to make himself feel better can cause problems, that he is imprecise with these things. At the same time, the whole problem with media credibility is how they don't treat misstatements evenly. So Donald Trump saying that he talked on the phone instead of in person with the Mexican president didn't cause 8 million people to lose their insurance. But when Barack Obama said, if you like your health care plan, you can keep it, media treated that as just sort of general politicking. When the White House admitted that they did a campaign to get the Iran deal passed, everyone says, well, that's just business as usual. And if the media could handle other people as if they could apply as much scrutiny to other people as they do they do Trump, they would have more trust.
But Joe, the president often speaks imprecisely. His supporters like that about him. He's not a focus group politician, and they view a lot of this as journalistic nitpicking. True or false?
They may view it that way, but the fact is it was the president of Mexico who said, I did not have a phone call with the president, reacting to the president's words. It was the leaders of the Boy Scouts who said, we did not have a phone call that the president said he had. That's what the press then reports. That's what leads them to ask those kinds of questions.
All right, let me get a break here. Email us, let us know what you think. MediaBuzz@foxnews.com. When we come back, it's been 6 days since Anthony Scaramucci was fired as White House communications chief after an extremely brief tenure, in part over the profanity-laced call he had with the New Yorker's Ryan Lizza that he never explicitly put off the record. But a partial audio of that conversation shows it wasn't some fiery rant with Lizza laughing at times as the mooch prods him for his source and on another leak, and the reporter asks to profile him.
So I'm just going to, what I'm going to do is I will eliminate everybody in the comms team and we'll start over. So it's no problem. Okay, but you're an American citizen. This is a major catastrophe for the American country. So I'm asking you as an American patriot to give me a sense for who leaked it.
Well, the only thing I can tell you is two people in the White House who I know wouldn't lie to me. And I wanted to ask you if you wanted to be profiled.
I don't want to be profiled.
Well, I'm not Steve Bannon. What you're trying to do.
I'm not Steve Bannon. No. I'm not trying to suck my own. I'm not trying to build my own brand.
And here's what Scaramucci told me in a brief interview. I'm accountable for what I said. I own what I said, but the reporter wrote it as if I said it in a menacing way, and the actual tapes tell a very different story. So, Molly, we heard the laughter there. Did this sound more like a friendly, confidential conversation between reporter and source, as opposed to something that would be deemed an on-the-record interview?
Oh, yeah. When we first heard this story, it sounded like Scaramucci was on some kind of cocaine-fueled rant, and then you listen to that, and it's actually pretty calm. But it doesn't change the underlying issue of what was Scaramucci doing talking to this reporter. Ryan Lizza is someone who routinely takes people out of context. I remember during the primary, he said that Jeb Bush mocked the notion of mass shootings, when in fact, Jeb Bush was saying something about human nature and how government can't solve all of the problems of the human condition, and he totally mischaracterized that. If you have a reporter who you know does that as a matter of course with Republicans or conservatives, you should be a little more careful talking to him.
Well, Ryan Lizza did accurately report on this conversation, but now we get to the question of sort of the black and white words versus at least the audio that the New Yorker released. So, look, Scaramucci made a mistake. He didn't say this is off the record. He admits he made a mistake, so that's not in dispute. But when you listen to this, it sounds less like an unhinged rant than just, does it sound less like an unhinged rant than the words would suggest in a transcript?
Certainly it does, but it also is terrifying to people like me, because that's the most dangerous thing you can do with a reporter is get into that kind of a banter with them where it's on the record, but that friendly banter is going back and forth. That's when you kind of relax.
So you had a freak out because you said, I probably have done this, and maybe reporters could have sabotaged me, and they did not.
Well, yeah, yeah. No, I mean,
put words in your mouth, John.
But I mean, that's how dangerous it is. I mean, every time you talk to a reporter, to not realize you're on the record if you haven't said, ground rules that you're not. That Ryan Lizza is great at getting you into that kind of a banter with him, and he then gets it, reports it, and it does look different on paper than it.
Yeah. Have you had conversations like this with sources? Maybe not as X-rated.
Okay. Quite like that.
But where they unload, where they criticize people in such a blunt way that they're kind of expecting you not to report it?
Well, for starters, if I'm ever having a conversation and there's a question of if it's on the record, I tell people this all the time. It's not just that you say this is off the record and then say your spiel. You need to make sure that I have agreed and both parties have agreed to this being off the record. Okay. And then it is. So there's sort of that first, which I think most people in his position or in, as you knew at the time, know that it's kind of that. You have to make that deal to start. In terms of have I gotten phone calls like this, I have had I covered crime for the most part in my last job. I have had many senior law enforcement officials call me before, frustrated with a story or to discuss back and forth with me beforehand why they didn't like the direction a story was going or something of that nature. Never have I had them ask me who my source was, and I've never had them even jokingly say, well, don't worry, if you don't tell me, I'm going to fire everyone. Yeah. That's a bridge that has never been crossed. And speaking of that, so Scaramucci comes into the White House, says he's going to fire all the leakers, and I think Trump supported him in that. Now he's become the subject of awful leaks, both unnamed White House officials dumping on him and how crazy he was, and even stories about a divorce he's going through. So he's certainly become a big fat target. Well, and there are major differences between the type of national security leaks we've seen from intelligence officials and the type of petty White House drama leaks that are routine for many administrations, although this administration seems to be full of nothing but leakers and people who want to make their case. But yes, he didn't succeed in his goal. Quick thought. You go after people, they're going to come after you. And that's what, and reporters are going to use the information. In other words, welcome to the NFL. Joe Trippi, Ellison Barber, thanks very much. Molly, we'll see you a little later ahead with Molly Hemingway, our new media groupthink segment on accusations that HBO is pro-slavery. But up next, a suspension at Fox News and a lawsuit involving the murder of a young DNC staffer. Fox News Channel's Eric Bolling, co-host of The Specialist and host of Cashin' In, has been temporarily sidelined after allegations published by the Huffington Post. A Fox News spokesperson said yesterday Eric Bolling has been suspended pending the results of an investigation which is currently underway. The HuffPost story late Friday, based on a dozen unnamed sources, said that Bolling, several years ago, allegedly texted an unsolicited photo of male genitalia to 3 current and former colleagues at Fox News and Fox Business. None of the women, who the story describes as having been upset, has come forward, and HuffPost did not identify them to Bolling's lawyer, Michael Bowe. Bowe gave me this statement yesterday. The anonymous, uncorroborated claims are untrue and terribly unfair. We intend to fully cooperate with the investigation so that it can be concluded and Eric can return to work as quickly as possible. The murder of a 27-year-old DNC staffer named Seth Rich has come roaring back into the news. The reason? A lawsuit against Fox News by a network contributor, former D.C. homicide detective Rod Wheeler. The police here say Rich was killed last year during a botched robbery.
Fox News retracted an online story about the case in May, saying it didn't meet the network's editorial standards, in part because senior editorial management hadn't approved it. When that story was posted, Wheeler went on several Fox programs and said he had reason to believe there was a connection between Seth Rich and WikiLeaks, which released the Democratic emails that U.S. officials say were obtained by Russian hackers.
When you look at that with the totality of everything else that I found in this case, it's very consistent for a person with my experience to begin to think, well, perhaps there were some email communications between Seth and WikiLeaks.
Wheeler now says he was misquoted in the story by Fox reporter Malia Zimmerman. His lawsuit also names Ed Butowski, a wealthy supporter of President Trump, alleging that Fox worked with Butowski to steer attention away from the Russian hacking of the DNC emails. But less than a week later, as lawnews.com reported, Wheeler told a website, "I am of the personal opinion that the information/article